Okay, for the sake of the recording, good afternoon, everybody. Today's subject matter is going to be talking about seller's property disclosure and home inspections and how they relate and what we can do to protect our clients and ourselves in our practice, how to be more efficient and more effective. Um, Without further ado, and all the hellos out of the way, I'm going to jump into a screen share here. Just one second. Okay, so just shout out if you have any questions. I put together an agenda here and I can share, or I'm going to have Terry email this out to everybody in the general population um, as to what we have available here. But we're going to be talking about the seller's property disclosure, home inspections. These rules and regulations, guidelines do not pertain just to sales that are in the MLS or sales that are represented by a licensed real estate professional. These rules, as a matter of legislation in the state of Pennsylvania, apply to all sales. So, from an interactive standpoint, can anybody chime in and tell me what that means?
FSBOs have to fill something out. Doesn't have
Bingo.
to be our form.
That's right. And a super overeducated for sale by owner client might even, be able to retort if they knew what was going on here. Hey, that's not a home inspection. You're not entitled to do that because this is what the law says. We're going to share that. We're going to talk about who's excluded from seller's property disclosure. We're going to talk about what is included in a seller's property disclosure. We're going to talk about home inspections. What do they cover? What if they miss something? How do I advise my client on these? We're going to talk about how that relates to the agreement of sale and the inspection contingency. We're going to talk about, I love liability limiting measures, and for your protection is a CYA measure that we're going to talk about. So the FYP CYA, what happens if the deal falls through? What are we talking about when we talk about an addenda to the seller's property disclosure? We're going to talk about buyer's reply to inspection, how that works, and how it dovetails with the change in terms addendum. And then we're going to talk about, from a practical standpoint, best practices. Just don't get cute with it, and a couple other products out there that can protect you and your client going forward. So, any questions, comments, concerns before we get rolling? Great. All right. The residential real estate transfers law. This is a Pennsylvania law, as you can see right here. And right here, these are the, sections. That's what that little squiggly S is. Sections 7301 through 7314 pertain specifically to the real estate disclosure, and then 7501 through 7512 deals with the home inspection. So let's get on to the fun part of this 2-for-1 legislation, which covers disclosure and inspection. So the first part here, 7102, talks about just super boring definitions and what we're talking about here, but a home inspection and a seller's property disclosure both deal with material defects. So, skipping ahead a little bit in our agenda, where we're talking about what happens if the deal falls apart. What happens if the deal falls apart and a home inspection's been performed, Ingrid? Do we have to share that home inspection with everybody on the MLS or everybody who looks at the property? What's your thoughts on that?
The home inspection, no, we don't have to share it with everyone.
You're darn right. We have to share material defects. Anything that's come up in the course of that inspection that identifies a material defect, we have to share that because that's now something in our scope of knowledge. But 90% of the stuff that we see on a home inspection talks about something being old and it's dated, or this is the anticipated useful life of this thing. We don't deal in crystal balls, we don't deal in speculation, and we don't want to talk about age as a material defect, or else a lot of us are in trouble. What we're talking about are the roof leaks, not the roof is 25 years old and is approaching the end of its useful life. If it's not leaking, we don't have to disclose that, okay? Another just a practice note for you guys: if you do decide to share a pre-inspection report or a inspection report from a deal that has fallen through on a previous contract, I recommend highly that you sterilize the associated document section of the MLS the moment it goes under contract, before the appraiser gets the appraisal order for that property. You should pull those documents out, because I have seen several times where the appraiser is going to use that home inspection as a shopping list to call for repairs or identified defects with the property that are going to become a concern for your underwriter. Okay. It's happening right now in one of our deals. Okay, now seller's property disclosure. Who's excluded? Here are the exemptions. John, can you tell me another place other than this super interesting document where we might find a list of the exemptions to the seller's property disclosure law? John must.
Oh, you're just lucky I got back from I was going to say like NAR website, PAR website.
That I'm sure it's there as well, but I want you to look at the front of your seller's property disclosure. Yep. It's right on there. So it talks about who may be exempt from that. Okay. I'm going to skip ahead through a good part of this, except for the general contents of the seller's property disclosure statement. So we have an 11-page document that is chock full of information, tons of questions. Is that the state required form for seller property disclosure? If I were a FSBO, is that the standard?
Nope.
No, that is much more informative than what the state requires. These right here in this contents of the property disclosure statement section, this talks about what the state minimum standards are for disclosure. And if you read through it, you're like, gee whiz, that's easy. Much easier than what our standard is. Our seller's property disclosure statement was built not only to satisfy the requirement of this legislation, but also to inform the buyer, probably because there was a rash of lawsuits around one particular or another thing. And each line was added because of personal experience or a lawsuit, somebody on the standard forms committee. And it makes it possible for a buyer to make an informed decision and move forward. Even under impulsive conditions. We have impulsive buyers. Anybody ever have one of those? This goes on to include failure to comply and stuff for that, but I don't want to get into those things at this point. I don't want to get lost in the weeds. Now, home inspection law. I just want to look at the definition here real quick. It's a non-invasive visual examination of some combination of the mechanical, electrical, or plumbing systems, or the structural and essential components of a residential dwelling, designed to identify material defects, there's that term, in those systems and components, and perform for a fee in connection with or preparation for a proposed or possible residential real estate transfer. The term also includes any consultation regarding the property that is represented to be a home inspection or that is described by any confusingly similar term. The term does not include an examination of a single system or component of a residential dwelling, such as, for example, its electrical or plumbing system or its roof. So we'll look at this in a little bit whenever we get to our agreement of sale portion. And that due diligence menu, when you have that little blank or blank contingency at the bottom, or that blank due diligence menu item, that's where you could include something, for example, like roof flashing, gutters, something like that, if you didn't want to elect a full home inspection. Now, it goes on, interestingly, to say the term also does not include an examination that is limited to inspection for one or more of the following. So, is a wood destroying insect inspection included in your home inspection? It is not. Underground tank and well, septic system, swimming pool or spa? Nope. And the one that caught me was alarm systems. I would kind of consider that a part of the electrical system, and I don't think anyone is going to give you a hard time if you turned up a system defect on a home inspection, but it says specifically that it's not included. So be aware of that, going forward. Also, air and water quality, you're going to have to identify that inspection separately in your due diligence menu. Tennis courts, playgrounds, equipment, pollutants, toxic chemicals, and environmental hazards. So this is just a fun desk reference. Might want to have handy, go back to from time to time, just to refresh your memory on what may and may not be included. Questions on any of that fun stuff? So, dealing with our seller's property disclosure statement, there are our 10 exclusions. What's the most common one that people try and not disclose as far as exclusion? Who thinks they're excluded but really aren't? Anybody? Anybody? Landlords? Landlords always try to be excluded, but they're not. So do power of attorney. They like to think that they're excluded. However, we need to remind them that power of attorney is not excluded. Only executors or administrators of a decedent estate, although guardianship and conservatives are. So is there any, rather than get totally lost in the weeds on this, is there any super interesting snags that anybody's hit on the seller property disclosure lately?
Well, it's been a little while, but I hit one simply because I didn't catch which box was checked. A box, they're little small boxes, and sometimes you have to figure out, okay, that's number 4 and so forth. And I had a guy mistakenly check shared well because it's right next to whatever else it was. And I
Yeah.
didn't catch it. And the seller's agent did. And we were able to rectify it because it was not a shared well. And I even did a double check on that from the sale before, when my seller had purchased. So we were confident that it wasn't, and we were able to amend it. But that came up, fortunately, before the contract was signed, but it was caught by the seller's agent.
Now, are we supposed to be helping our clients fill out these property disclosures? Nah, not really. I mean, it's not like I want you taking the pen and filling out these boxes. Now, if they have a question, as to what does this even mean? Yeah, that's within your
Right.
realm of services, and you're supposed to do that. Also, I really advise, whether you're representing as a buyer or seller agent, to put your eyes on that seller's property disclosure, go over it and question if something isn't filled out. If something is missed on that seller's property disclosure, it usually means that the seller didn't have the answer at the top of their head, or they were going back and forth about how they wanted to disclose that. And a lot of times those things get skipped, and a lot of times those things that are skipped wind up being the problem, because that was the thing, like, oh gosh, do I really need to disclose this? Do I want to disclose this? They meant to ask their agent. They didn't ask their agent. They were trying to figure out how honest they wanted to be, and they never filled it out. So those are the ones, the missed boxes, those are the ones that you want to do your job and try and get an answer, get that filled in, because if we don't, there could be a lawsuit. Not saying every time, I'm just saying we've got one that we're experiencing, that the listing agent is in hot water because they didn't go back and check that box. Buyer's agent's in trouble too. And we hate to see that stuff, right?
Yep. It can also be the case that people actually forget about a flaw because they've lived with the minor correction to that flaw, which isn't really a fix, like a sliding glass door where the lock got broken before they ever bought the house. They've
Sure.
lived with that broken lock and put this stick in the door. So when it comes down to, is everything okay? Yeah. And then my clients, the buyers, find it and say, hey, wait a minute, they didn't disclose it. We got
And
through it simply because they were reasonable.
And these are prompts for you to ask your buyer, do you understand this? I had a property listed years ago, and I always use this as a kind of a illustration, that I was working with Dave and Ellen to fill out their seller's property disclosure. They had a bunch of questions. They were a little older. So I went to the property while they filled it out and answered questions. And I said, did you ever have any problems with your septic system? Nope. Great. Moving on. And we get the property under contract, and it's being sold to a company. So they have a really high-end home inspector who runs a camera line out the septic system, and find that there's an issue with the distribution box. And the issue with the distribution box, and if you're not familiar with what a distribution box is, coming out of the septic tank, the settlement tank, there's a line going out to a distribution box that branches out to distribute the effluent to the drain field. So, by the way, hi, Don. So the problem with the distribution box is that there wasn't one. There was an oak tree in its place. And I went back to Dave and Ellen and I said, hey, you said that you never had any problems with your septic system. That just baffles my mind. And they said, well, of course, but we never did a load of laundry and took a shower at the same time. Otherwise, it backed up into the laundry room. This was just a matter of perspective. They had lived with this drain field for 40 years, and it wasn't an issue to them. But to somebody, it was just the way the house was. But to somebody coming from a city who had never lived with a drain field, or for anybody who had realistic expectations, that was going to be a huge problem. So just ask the questions. If that box is skipped, ask them why, and can we get that taken care of? All right, moving on. Back to this. There's going to be a bunch of really nitpicky questions. This seller's property disclosure has been updated many times during my years of practice, from, oh gosh, I want to say 6 pages several years ago to 9, and now we're up to 11. Pretty soon it'll be 30. But some of the most notable changes were depth of well and gallons per minute, stuff that a lot of homeowners really don't have any idea. But we want to be as thorough as we can. And whenever I'm advising my clients to fill it out, yes is an okay answer, no is an okay answer, unknown unknown is an okay answer, and so is not applicable. So if you don't know the answer, don't fudge it. Just go ahead and check unknown. And that just lets the buyer and the buyer's agent know that that's something that they have to investigate a little bit more. Hey, Tina, thanks for joining. Oh yeah, here's the well. On the disclosure and for inspections, well's a really tough one to inspect. We can test the water quality really easily, but the problem is, has your well ever run dry? That indicates an issue with the water table. That's only as good as, what happens down the street. Maybe somebody else drills a new well, or the quarry down the road starts blasting. That could change your access to water in no time.
Or
So,
if you forget and leave the horse tank getting watered for hours.
yeah, and we can talk about all the crazy hypotheticals that are out there, but I don't want to scare you off from real estate. So is a fireplace or a chimney, is that included in a home inspection, or is that a separate inspection? In my estimation, that's part of a home inspection. What about a fuel tank?
Yep.
Well, that's my trick question, and MJ walked right into it. Depends if it's underground.
True.
So if it's an underground tank, according to the law, then we're going to have to do some separate inspections on that. Just like a septic, I would rather you be, put on a belt and suspenders to make sure that your client is protected. If you know there's an underground fuel storage tank that you need to investigate, um, go ahead and include that in some language on that blank inspection, due diligence option. If you don't know there's an underground tank and find it out later, then, that's obviously something that we can deal with at that point by building it into the reply to inspection. So you should all be very familiar with this. The one thing I want to point out to everyone, something that just gets kind of mixed up for a lot of folks, the last version of the seller's property disclosure said, is there a problem with any of your stuff? Well, what this says, this section is intended to identify problems or repairs. So what most people check is whether or not this is included. What they're trying to find out is the AC working? Yes. I mean, are you aware of any problems or repairs needed? So the preferred answer in this section is going to be no on everything that is included, and A on something that doesn't even come with the house. Pools and spas, fun stuff. Anybody know how to get a pool inspected? Good luck in November. I've seen it done. I mean, the guys go out there in waders. A little bit chilly. Radon is going to be your separate inspection. Okay, moving on.
Dustin,
What's up?
you got do you have a pool inspection company that you would recommend?
There's a bunch of them around here. They usually, whoever, if your home seller has somebody open and close it, those are the guys that I usually call to have them do an inspection. They will usually do an inspection for you. And if
Okay.
they do all their own maintenance, ask them where they get their chemicals, but it's going to be whoever the local pool maintenance company is. Those are the guys who are going to do the inspection.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
And that can vary from, I think the bottom end's probably about $1.75 up, depending on how elaborate, and what kind of pool we're dealing with, probably up into 300s. So, You guys been hanging out at all, you know, I love my guidelines for preparation and use. You know, as hardworking as our standard forms committee is on the forms, they put in even more work on the guidelines for preparation and use in conjunction with the attorneys at PAR to make sure that they tell us how to do stuff. Whenever you go through here, you know, they're going to talk about what your responsibilities are with each form. They're going to talk about, you know, this has the legal requirements of property disclosure. And it's also going to talk to you as you go through here, different practice notes on stuff. So now the requirement to fill out a disclosure is a requirement of the seller, not a requirement of the licensee. However, on the buyer side, if you have not assisted your client in evaluating this, then it could come back on you if the client decides to start suing everybody. So just be aware. Also, a disclosure is not a substitute for an inspection or a warranty or anything like that. Why? Because it's, you know, you got to take all of this with a grain of salt, don't we? Scrolling through, let's see how much fun this is. It's an 11-page form, and this goes through every subparagraph of the form. So it's an 11-page form with 15 pages of instructions. That's how thorough the guidelines are in the at parealtors.org. If you haven't been to parealtors.org, let's do it right now. Has anybody not been to parealtors.org to check out the guidelines once or twice? If you haven't, you just go to your members login. And my internet's being lazy, but you can put in whatever form you want. And it's going to give you everything you need. You just type in disclosure. It's going to give you, whoops, you spell it right. It's going to give you a whole list of topics, including standard forms, blogs. There's going to be articles on the subject, etc. So if you're not familiar with these resources, I encourage you to go in and check it out. And you can download the form here, and you can view the guidelines here. So it tells you exactly what you need to do. Plus, it's going to give you a list of all the legal articles that have been issued on that topic right there on that same page. So it's dynamite. I couldn't do a meeting agenda without this page. All right. So when we talk about disclosure issues, you know, today's topic is twofold, right? We're talking about disclosures and inspections. Just failure to disclose, everybody, is failure to disclose is the #1 reason why we wind up in court and or mediation. The #1 reason that a deal falls apart traditionally. Over the lifespan of my career, the most common reason has been inspections. Over the past 3 years, there haven't been as many inspections, so the #1 reason for falling through has been financing. But by and large, I think over the span of your career, you're going to find more deals fall apart because of inspection issues than anything else. So that's why it's important to manage the expectations of your clients up front, both buyer and seller, to protect yourself and your client, your seller client, from liability. You need to encourage them to disclose thoroughly, honestly, and early. We don't want them coming up with this stuff like we have in a dual agency disclosure dispute that I'm dealing with in one of our offices right now. Buyer went to do a pre-settlement walkthrough. Seller said, yep, everything's good to go. And they go into the bathroom in a mobile home, and the floor starts shaking a little bit. And he said, oh yeah, the floor needs replaced here. So that was non-disclosed. And now we're in a dispute over entitlement to that earnest money deposit. So advise your clients, disclose early to save themselves heartache and liability down the road, because ultimately what they want to do is sell the property, right? So one of the articles that I've included and that I'm going to be emailing out to everybody is this: just disclose it. Okay. Most of the legal hotline issues, and I talk to legal hotline all the time. Before you call legal hotline, call me. They prefer that I call them, and ask them about how we do, disclosure and whatnot. If I'll call them and say, hey, what about this? They're going to say, disclose it. So there's no exception for sellers who use the property as a rental, as we discussed it, and have never lived there. Landlords should have a fair amount of knowledge about the property, just because, they're professional homeowners, right? There's no exception for flippers. If you are representing a listing that is a flip, I want you to take extra caution. And if you are representing a buyer who is purchasing a flip, I really want you to exercise additional caution. Were permits obtained for the property? Did they convert a garage into additional living space? And if so, were the permits obtained for that? Because that's a big deal. You may find out that those properties who are those additions who have not been properly permitted may not be legally permissible and could put us in an issue. And for that purpose, I encourage you to get the enhanced title policy whenever you're representing a buyer on the purchase of a flip, because that can cover potentially failures of zoning or failures of permitting or anything like that. So there's no exception for mixed use properties. I want you to be aware of that and have that in your mind. If you're selling an apartment building that is 90% commercial, but there's an apartment upstairs, do you need a seller's property disclosure? Yes, you do. If you're selling a property that is 90% residential and has a storefront, does that need a seller's property disclosure? Yes, it does. So anytime there's a little bit residential component to it, there is a 100% obligation to fill out a seller's property disclosure. Okay. What about raw land, everybody? Somebody pipe up. Raw land. We doing a disclosure on that? Nope. Raw land is absolutely exempt. Okay. Murder, suicide, arrests, anything like that we need to disclose on? No, we don't. Is it a good practice to disclose it? Well, they're going to find out anyway. That's going to be a judgment call for you and the seller to figure out, because day one, the neighbors are going to come over with a plate of brownies to see who moved into the murder house, and they're going to find out. I want you to read these articles when you're bored and see how these things pertain to your practice of real estate. One of the most important things, and let me get to my agreement of sale here, is what we select for our clients. Everybody still with me? You all
Yep.
asleep?
Alive.
All right, good.
Good
Good
with
to
you.
know. Good, good, good. If I could see your faces, I know that your eyes would be glassed over. but I'm sure this, not that interesting, but you need to have it. Oh, there's MJ. See your finger. Seller representations, this comes into disclosures a little bit. Have we had issues in the past where somebody said that something was public sewer when in fact it was a septic system? Yes, we have.
Mm.
Dealing with it right now. Land use restrictions. There's plenty of places to disclose that, but one of the places to disclose it is in the agreement of sale. So clean and green or other stuff like that. Notices regarding land use restriction, that ties in with that.
Agricultural zone is critical for rural, because city people don't understand that agricultural zone means certain activities are going to happen or may happen on, say, the land next door. And if they don't want to watch animals having sex outside, they may have an issue.
Okay. That's it never occurred to me that might be offensive to somebody, but there was a local township supervisor race in Dickinson Township here in Cumberland County, where the platform or portion of the platform by that candidate was to stop this type of manure spreading, which is pretty egregious. I mean, it's awful, but hey,
Mhm.
you gotta eat, right?
That's right.
Problem is it's human. The manure they're spreading. So,
ah.
all right. Buyer due diligence and inspections. We're looking at section 12 here, paragraph 12. Rights and responsibilities. This talks about, who must be granted access to the property and who is entitled to be at those inspections. Who must be granted access? It's clearly stated. Okay. Who may be granted access? Parties to the contract and their agent. What about Uncle Bob? Nope. But he knows about houses. Forget about it. What about mom and dad? You mean Daddy the deal killer? No, he's not. He's not guaranteed access to the property. And you can draw a hard line on this. Sometimes the buyer's going to get bent out of shape about it. But if you run into this situation, call me, we'll talk through it. I'm happy to be the bad guy. You can make me the heavy and say it's brokerage policy or the seller doesn't want it, whatever we need to do. Now, seller must have all utilities on without exception. That's for all inspections and appraisals and the pre-settlement walkthrough. All inspections, including all inspections, must be provided to the seller. I mean, to the buyer. And then the seller has a right upon a request to receive a free copy of any inspection report
Right.
from the party for whom it was prepared, unless otherwise stated. Seller does not have a right to receive a copy of any lender's appraisal report. So that comes into play later. They kind of tuck that in there. But that's just remember that is in writing here. Now, the buyer waives or elects at the buyer's expense to have the following inspections, right? So, certifications and investigations that we have here. So they are specifically and explicitly either waiving or electing. So, has anybody had the situation where a buyer specifically elected a home inspection and specifically waived a radon inspection, and then you get a call from a home inspector who wants to set a radon test kit 2 days prior to a home inspection? Has anybody had that happen? Does anybody care?
Yes, I do care.
Yes,
I
I
didn't have it
care.
happen.
I've had it happen. And I said, no, thanks. That's something that they can do after closing. Well, what's the big deal, says the home inspector. And I said, well, the big deal is they specifically waived it. And even if they they pinky promise that they're not going to negotiate on the basis of that radon inspection, they're going to have knowledge of it, right? And they're also going to negotiate a lot harder on the findings of this home inspection based on the knowledge that they have on the radon inspection. And if the whole deal falls through, that's just another bunch of information that we have access to that we might not have had before. So, what all is included in the home inspection? It's all stated right here. And then we already went over the laws regarding it. As the inspection law states, wood infestation is broken out separately. Deeds, restrictions, and zoning, that's a separate one. Oh, what kind of fun has happened to anybody here on the call regarding deeds, restrictions, and zoning? Well, if you have questions having to do with rights of way or use of the property, I strongly urge you to elect this, okay? Whether that's historic preservation restrictions, anything like that, do it. Water service, we often think of water service as, whether there's bugs in the water, whether it's drinkable, but read on. It says the buyer may obtain an inspection of the quality and quantity of the water system from a properly licensed or otherwise qualified water and well testing company. So what are we talking about there? Well, we had a property sold where the well went dry a month or two after closing. And that was a significant issue due to the location. The well driller said, I can't do anything for you. It's so high up on this mountain and it's so shaly and then sandy that I'm not going to be able to get a well in there. So these people were restricted to building a rainwater collection and then purification system for their home and supplementing that with tankers of water so that their house had enough water to drink. So their basement was basically a giant water storage facility. So if you have any questions about that, just call me. If you are selling a property that is an estate and there's absolutely no way of knowing whether that well is run dry before, this may be something that you want to investigate. Call up a local well driller and say, hey, what do you know about this neighborhood? Those guys know what's going on, just like the septic guys do. They'll know if you are in an area prone to failure. And if it does fail, they'll know whether or not you're going to be able to get a perk test. They'll know if you're in an area where there's like 3 inches of topsoil. That's not enough to do anything with. So in on-lot sewage inspection, if you have a property with a septic system and you only do one inspection, I'm praying that you're doing the septic inspection, okay? If you are accustomed to selling city properties only and have never sold a property with on-lot sewage management, then call me before you do your first deal and I will walk you through that. If you've never sold a property with a septic system, you're living a charmed life. Property and flood insurance. Anybody aware? I hope everybody's aware. Maybe you've been blessed in this too. Home insurance is going, homeowners insurance and auto insurance is going up in Pennsylvania. It's going up nationwide. California's been really hit. New Jersey and New York have been really hit. It's coming Pennsylvania's way. So over the next 2 years, I would anticipate property and casualty insurance to go up dramatically over the next few years. But this is basically a get out of jail free card. If you elect this contingency, or you see it elected on one of your listing contracts, or a contract to buy one of your listings, just think about that for a second, because this is the only one with such a squishy standard. Who determines the insurability of the property? The buyer may determine the insurability of the property by making application for property and casualty insurance for the property to a responsible insurer. And that's all it says about the standard, right? Was everybody aware of that?
Yep. But if you know that they have a pit bull or a Rottweiler or a Malamute or a Doberman, they may have to do some shopping.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, but if they decide that they want to get out of buying this house, all they have to do is say, ah, man, I didn't care for the insurance.
Yep.
Property boundaries. Buyer may engage the services of a surveyor, title abstractor, or other qualified professional to assess the legal description, certainty and location of boundaries, and or the quantum of land. Does title insurance cover any of that stuff? No, title insurance covers liens, stuff like that. An enhanced policy may cover encroachments, and stuff of that nature. However, the quantum of land is not guaranteed by anything in this contract. So if the seller was wrong, the seller bought it thinking it was 20 acres, and he sells it thinking it's 20 acres. And then the buyer finds out that it's in fact 15 acres. Is the seller liable? No, not really. So what happens in a wonderful place called Pennsylvania is we have a meets and bounds system where we talk about the property line running from the center of the creek to the pile of stones to the old oak tree on the corner. And the old oak tree was, killed or was destroyed in a forest fire, 75 years ago. So now everyone just kind of assumes where it was, that's an issue. And then, you have things like a physical property description that is starting with 100-acre parcel, accepting out smaller parcels being sold to the neighbor, except for this 10-acre parcel described in this deed. So the physical description that you have for a 20-acre parcel may have started as a description for a 100-acre parcel. So if you have something like that, it's okay to elect this property boundary thing. So it even states right here, any numerical representations of size or property are approximations only and may be inaccurate. Wow.
That's critical when the owner says, well, it's out there to that line of trees and it goes over to that post and then it goes to whatever. And somebody says, well, where does the property go to? And you say, well, it goes out to that line of trees and and then you're in trouble.
Sure. Because, that's kind of an oral history of this property. Maybe it's been in the family for a generation and they say it runs up to the creek. What happens if the creek moves?
Yep.
And, it happens. I was involved in a property transaction where it's supposed to be 30 acres. The farmer who was selling it at closing said, I really think it's closer to 20, but nobody could work it out. The realtor whips out his calculator and looks at the description and starts trying to convert perches to acres and says, no, that's correct. It is the 30 acres. Okay, well, whatever. They closed with the assurances of the real estate broker who was involved in the transaction. And then a survey turned up that in fact, 10 acres of that had been sold off previously to the neighbor. So, if you don't know, don't guess. Here's where I would include specific things. If you don't want to scare your seller off by writing a buyer side offer for a whole home inspection, and you only have questions about a roof or a chimney, you can put that right in here. Here are some other things that happen to be inspectable. One of the things that we need to convey to our buyers and be very certain that they understand is these are the things that are inspecting that we can inspect. And here is the importance of each of those things that we're inspecting. So, for example, that septic system, if you're selling a house that's an estate to somebody who's never had a septic system, well, you don't know if they've ever had a septic system unless you say, hey, do you know how these work? Do you know the importance of this? This is probably the most expensive single component of your home that you can repair, except for the whole home. So make sure they understand it. Number two, make sure that they understand that a home inspector is going to be doing a visual inspection only, and that a crystal ball isn't part of their toolkit. They can't tell you whether the basement has flooded or not if there's no visual evidence of it. And they can't tell you if there's mold behind the walls, and they can't tell you if that basement will flood. So if somebody's looking to make living quarters in the lower level of a house, tell them, this is likely something that you're going to want to invest in a waterproofing system for. Basements in central Pennsylvania are, prone to getting water because they're holes in the ground, and we are in Pennsylvania.
If you want to win a bar bet, ask people to tell you which state, there's only one, has more mileage of streams, any size, than Pennsylvania. What is it?
Virginia.
Nope. North
I g-
and west. Go north, go west.
I give up.
It's
Michigan.
Alaska.
Oh, okay.
Alaska. And do you know how much freaking bigger Alaska is than us?
That's
It's
way
the only
bigger.
state that has more mileage of streams. You can clean up on a bar bet.
Wow,
But
that's
why
interesting.
we have what our basements are damp. They're going to be. We're wet.
Okay. Any questions before I move on from the seller's property disclosure? Oh, wait, I meant the agreement of sale. The part I wanted to get to on this is timeframes for home inspections. What are the 3 timeframes that you should be aware of on a home inspection? Anybody, please shout that out. That's 3 numbers I'm looking for.
10, 5, and 2.
Yes, thank you. 10, 5, and 2. So we've got a 10-day contingency period guaranteed in writing right here. If it's going to be other than 10 days, you would want to specify that there. What's the 5-day? Anybody?
Buyer reply.
5-day is the negotiation period. Okay.
Right.
So if the buyer makes a reply to inspection, the seller within that first 10 days, the buyer has 5 additional days for a negotiation period. So that's 5 additional days, not 5 days beginning on the day of reply, but 5 additional days after the 10 days. So that 5-day period is meant for a negotiation period. During the negotiation period, the seller will acknowledge in writing the seller's agreement to satisfy all terms of the proposal, and the buyer and seller will negotiate another mutually acceptable written agreement, and the buyer will accept. But if they can't come to terms during that 5 days, what next, everybody? We've got 2 days for a termination period, I'll call it. They don't have a snazzy name for it like negotiation period. So we're going to call it a 10-day contingency period, a 5-day negotiation period, and a 2-day termination period. So of those 3 time periods, 10, 5, and 2, which ones may you terminate the deal on the buyer side?
10 and 2.
Correct. By this contract, if somebody was a nitpicker, they would say, well, you can't terminate during the 5-day. That improper termination during the 5-day negotiation period has jeopardized your entitlement to the earnest money deposit. I'm not saying that's guaranteed to lose you your earnest money deposit. I'm saying if somebody wanted to be a pain in the neck, they could push that. Now, what of those 3 time periods, the 10, 5, and 2, may the seller terminate the agreement? At what point during this 7-day saga can the seller say, I've had enough, I'm done here?
5, the
Nope, none of them.
negotiation.
That was a trick question.
0.
I gotcha. The seller may not terminate, no matter how frustrated they are. Their only option is to hang in there and let the seller or let the buyer can the deal. All right. Now, what happens? I mean, right off the bat, the buyer makes a 42 item reply to inspection during their 10-day inspection contingency window. It rubs the seller the wrong way. And they make no reply during that 5 days. What happens? Well,
Automatically terminated.
no, it's not automatically terminated. The buyer must terminate. If they don't terminate within that 2-day contingency or that 2-day termination period, they just bought themselves a house as is. Let me say that again. If the seller fails to reply and the buyer fails to terminate, then the buyer will be taking the house as is. So if no mutually acceptable, so look here at, what's that, 13(3)(b). If no mutually acceptable written agreement is reached, or if seller fails to respond during the negotiation period within 2 days following the end of the negotiation period, the buyer will accept the property with the information stated in the report, or terminate this agreement by written seller to notice with all deposit monies returned to the buyer according to the terms. So they're either going to accept the property or terminate. That's only 2 options. And then they go on to put this in bold print so that everybody ignores it. But it says, if buyer and seller do not reach a mutually acceptable written agreement and buyer does not terminate this agreement by written notice to seller within the time allotted in 13(b)(3)(b), buyer will accept the property and agree to the release in paragraph 28. That means seller's off the hook. Ongoing negotiations do not automatically extend the negotiation period. Capiche? Be aware of your time frames. It'll save you time in court. Okay? That's all I wanted to talk about on the agreement of sale, unless somebody else has some fun to bring up. We're coming down the home stretch here, guys. Buyer's reply to inspection or written corrective proposal, not to be used as an addendum to the agreement of sale. This is merely a communication tool. This is to satisfy the requirement for a written reply, and it does that. This is not an addendum, should not be signed by seller. They can't say it any more times. Not an addendum, they say it up here, not an addendum down here. Somebody's going to say there's no place for the seller to sign. That's right, because the seller's not supposed to sign it. This is a communication tool. It may be used to check off every single one of these that you've done, or you can reply to each of those inspections individually. as the situation dictates. Now, if the buyer fills this out, sends it to the listing agent, here's the guidelines for the preparation and use of the buyer's reply to inspection. Fun stuff. Tell you all about it. The buyer is going to use that communication tool to communicate with the listing agent and the seller. And then the listing agent is going to carefully craft their reply or their change in terms as they, understand it, and send that back to the buyer for signatures. At least that's how I like it done. If I'm the listing agent, I get to control it. Now, one thing I want you to know on timeframes, use this portion right here to extend the specific time frame mentioned in specific lines of the agreement of sale. If you don't do that, then you could be in problems. So any agreement signed during the negotiation period that's a change in terms could be construed as a mutually agreed upon resolution. So if you just want to extend the time frame to allow for more negotiations, don't say other, extend inspection window. That doesn't guarantee you all the rights and responsibilities associated with the specific paragraph if you extend it specifically by chapter and verse in here, okay? Don't get caught in a trap, because there's people out there that'll jump on any screw up in language. Here is the further guidelines for the preparation and use of the agreement of sale. I mean, for the change in terms addendum. This goes on to give you practice notes. Common sense, notes like be sure to leave enough time before the settlement date so follow-up inspection can be done by the appraiser or whatever. Seller assist, purchase price, etc. Now, when a sale is terminated, what happens to that inspection? We already talked about that, about how we disclose material defects to the property. Now, what happens, everybody, if a transaction falls apart and there's a dispute as to entitlement to the earnest money? What are the options? Everything I do in every deal is to avoid getting into court or mediation because it's a waste of your time and my time. There's nothing worse than getting paid too little, and that's working for absolutely free, or to work to get out of a transaction that's failed. You want it to be able to come apart easily if something happens. So if there's a dispute over the entitlement to the earnest money deposit, the first stop on that train is going to be mediation. Now, if a mediation is initiated, I need you to understand this. If mediation fails, nobody's going to get that earnest money deposit. It stays with the broker forever. Okay. So if we have a $3,000 earnest money deposit, seller won't release it, buyer wants to fight for it, buyer has to wait 180 days and they get their money back simply by asking for it, if the seller hasn't initiated mediation. If the buyer is impatient, wants their day to yell at this seller, and they go to mediation and mediation fails, I can't ever let that money out of my escrow account. Just a fun little fact that I wanted to share with you. Two other little things that I will share with you here. This is the FYP CYA, for your protection, get a home inspection. This is a helpful document that's put out by HUD. This is technically required on all HUD properties, FHA, VA, USDA. But I say use it every time because it clearly just covers your butt. It makes you safer. And then that will protect both you, the brokerage, and it helps to communicate to your buyer client the importance of a home inspection. It's okay if they want to move on without one, just know, there's risks. Seller Shield is a product. I usually don't pitch products because I don't care what you use as long as you do a good job. I like Seller Shield because it's pretty unique as far as I know, in that it's a warranty that covers your seller in the case of undisclosed defects. More than that, it's a really good tool to have them be able to fill out their seller's property disclosure and their lead-based paint hazard disclosure form. Really easy to use digital disclosure that they can go in and they can't move on until they complete it. Now, if they decide to spend the $200, then they get $20,000 of paid legal representation by a real estate attorney for a claim made within the first year, and it goes up from there. If they want 3 years of protection, I think it's like $399 or something like that, $299. But it protects the client, so it has the potential to keep you out of court if something arises. It only costs your client like $200 or $300, and they're safe. They're protected. I recommend this very highly to estates, very highly to anybody who hasn't lived in the property, and absolutely recommend it on properties where there's been a home inspection waived, because a home inspection isn't just protection for a buyer. A home inspection is protection for a seller. The seller has the peace of mind knowing that somebody else has gone through there and double checked things for the buyer, and they're probably safe on most things. However, if there's no home inspection in the case of a multiple offer situation, these people are just coming in here and rolling the dice, and everybody really means it whenever they write an offer without a home inspection, until things go sideways in the spring when we get 4 inches of rain in 3 days and their basement floods. Now they want to sue everybody. So having that additional $20,000 of legal protection might come in handy for only $200. So that's all I really had to go through here. Oh, I guess there's home warranties as another level of protection potentially for your buyer. But that's what I've got here. I'm going to be sending this out to everybody in the company. Do you guys have any questions before we move on?
I have a question, Justin. I wasn't able to get on the site, what was it?
PARealtors.org.
Yeah, I guess I never signed up for it.
Oh my goodness. We've been together this long. All right. You're going to need your NRDS number to get registered. Go into, well, we can talk about this offline. I'll connect with you and make sure that you can get in there, but you're going to need your NRDS number. There should be a widget in there to help you identify your NRDS number. And if that doesn't work, do you still get a paper copy of Realtor Magazine?
Yes, it comes to the office.
Yeah, your NRDS number is on that mailing label.
Oh, I
So,
have the number.
Oh, okay, great. Then that should be what you need to get logged into PARealtors.org, the best resource out there.
Okay.
And if you have issues, shoot me a text, give me a call, whatever.
Okay.
All right, everybody. I appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Have a wonderful week. Enjoy the beautiful weather.
Be safe out there.
Talk to you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Call me if you need me. Bye now.
Thanks.